Yeah, you say that. Start our video. Awesome. Good morning, Emily. This is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Edit this video. This video will not self-destruct in 5 seconds. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go look up Mission Impossible television series. Not that Tom Cruise shit.
So after this week, y'all will have 2 more of these sessions?
This is it.
This
Yeah.
is it? Okay, cool.
We're done until September as far as CARES programming. And actually, I think everybody. Yeah. So we're good until I know we've got a handful of different programs planned for September. Our Lunch and Learn series starts. That's typically the third Thursday of each month. That's going to be virtual only though, so we'll handle it from our desktops. I think everything in September is virtual only.
Yes.
Until we figure out how to make the auditorium the streamlined creature it was meant to be.
Yeah, because like I said, I met with Matt and Karen last week and I talked about that a lot. What it sounds like is the contractors y'all worked with either didn't understand what y'all wanted or wanted to sell you a particular set of equipment that didn't end up being needed.
I'm just under the low bidder theory.
Yeah.
And so, and it's, I'm hoping it's the low bidder theory, but yeah, there's too many workarounds that I've seen. Cody was wonderful in sending us stuff as he was leaving and even after he left on how he did workarounds, and it looks great, but at the same time,
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are all.
Is that our new speaker?
It's the Blue Snowball, according to the list here. So, but it works well and it's picking everything up. I decided just to leave the recording on, so we're good for now. I've already told Emily, our staffer upstairs who will edit this, should she choose to accept this mission, that this tape will not destruct in 5 seconds. So
You can't leave today
Why not?
because I said so. If you want me to talk, you gotta stay, because then I can't malign you.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I've got to.
I like this malign people face to face. Can I sit here or do I have to move this?
no, I think you're being picked up pretty well.
But you'll have it in front of you for the best.
Oh, well, okay, then I take that back. Let's slide it down. You got some slack.
Yeah,
So,
I can push it over.
yeah, we'll slide it just a little bit more.
last day.
Thank you.
We were just chatting about September's programming. Our auditorium needs a little bit of streamlining in its technology before we can really put it to full use. So we're doing virtual programming in September.
Give me a freaking quill pen. You and your technology. Are you going to say yes or no to Soulful Aging?
Probably not. 'Cause
Okay.
there's no timing and I have
Well,
no budget.
Seth already beat you to the punch.
Oh,
Apparently
okay.
he works too hard for you. And so I want you to give him release time because I actually would have liked his story. We have about 8 people,
Yeah.
but
I have no budget for that kind of thing.
I'm sorry.
I have no budget for that kind of thing.
No,
I
I'm
get
not
no
talking.
money for
You
it.
know, well, here's the backstory. Robert, you can close your ears. It's the European approach. And if I were racist, I would say they charge fees so Chinese people can get tenure by getting an article published in English. And so their fees are huge. People our age and even younger, I have a 40-something who wants to contribute. He said, what's this fees shit? And then Rick Moody, you know him?
Uh-uh.
Oh, he sent a note saying that in 2007, they were listed as a predatory journal. And I sat there and I thought, you know, I value my reputation. I don't need to do this. I actually think Soulful Aging makes a great deal, and obviously you do too. But I sure in hell don't want to get tagged with spending my extra inning, dealing with fees, dealing with a predatory journal. So I wrote the other 3 editors and I said, we have to find an alternative journal. And so we're going to talk next week. After this, Barbara and I are going to Galveston for a couple of days just to blow off steam. And, but, you know, it's like this technology. I mean, you have to streamline September and, you know, you have a mission. I don't have a mission, you know, and I sure in hell don't need technology other than what, and you covered my butt with, you know, the front slide and looking at it. And so I go, fine.
I've still got this image of a predatory journal as, you know, a bunch of academics putting on pirate garb and going in.
Well,
and saying,
yeah, or
"Arr, read me your article."
or give me a drug, an illicit one, better yet, you know? So,
Yeah, I'm trying to, there've been a couple of journals we published in where you could pay extra to make it open access.
yes, and that's different.
And that's different. But as a, I don't have budget for that.
Well, and the other thing is,
'Cause
I
most of them are
wrote
cheap.
them right off the bat and I said, if you're serious about this fees stuff, bye-bye, because we don't need tenure.
Yeah.
You don't have a budget. I can't turn to you and say, by the way, I need whatever the hell I need, $800. Really?
Not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So,
But if you know, if you get a timetable, and don't have a fee associated.
so I'll put a question mark, not a flat out no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, not targeting so
And
much.
you
as
can live
the,
with that. I
this
just,
is a
right
standard,
now, I am.
Well, but you're teaching 3 different, I mean, but you know, I figured it was easier for people to say no to me. They didn't want me even contacting people. And so you could have gotten a note from Elmer Fudd, you know, in a week saying,
Then I would have just gone delete.
yeah, no,
'Cause
you know,
I get those all the time.
and you sit there and you say, the point of being an editor, like this point, I mean, you guys determined what I was going to do. And I could have said no, and then we would have renegotiated. But if some third party,
If you're doing all that, you might even be able to make a book out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that was my first thought, that
would love
30
to see a live
contributors
action
makes a
one.
book, not a,
well, they were only going to pick 13 and they are going to pick them.
oh. when-
And so, you know, I wanted no's so I could say, here are the 31. And by the way, 14 said no. And so I'm crushed that you and Seth may not be part of it, but you make my life easier. But I am
I'm
really,
not doing a competition.
well, you know,
That is, Andy, that's just not happening.
no,
So
you
if
know,
that's the case, then it's a no,
and
no.
I suppose I should have done more due diligence,
Yeah,
but
no.
you know, Rick Moody sent this thing. And then I talked to somebody who had worked with them and I said, this isn't going to fly. I don't have time for this.
So it sounds like you may be a no too.
Well, fortunately, one of the 4 editors, this woman named Heike, who I've never met, said, I think, and she's German, and she said, there's no way I'm going to pay fees. So that's 2 of us. Tom is the titular 4th editor who really can't do anything. And I got a note for him saying, I'm in New York. I'll talk to you later this week. And supposedly we'll have a Zoom, but you know, that's three. And then there's one of us, this Roberta person, who's just gangbusters, which I love because she can be first lead if that's the way she wants to play it. But you really have your own priorities.
No, I'm not going into a competition.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
write An article and have them say, I'm sorry, you're not good enough to be in the top 13.
Well, you don't know what they, I mean, the 31 we picked ranged from 24 to 90. They weren't all gerontologists. There were some clinicians, there were social workers. I wouldn't call you a gerontologist. I viewed you as a rabbi. And we didn't have any other rabbis unless Tom has managed to finagle that as well. And the editors aren't going to write.
Yeah.
So there was you and there were John Allen from the Manager Clinic, who's an atheist. And I thought, that's good, and so it was, and then all these Europeans who I've never met, but they know. And since it's supposedly a cross-Atlantic venture, that made some sense.
Why don't y'all pitch it as a book then?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you just pitch it as a book to somebody?
Because I'm lazy.
Oh. Okay, well.
I mean, you guys don't demand very much, and I don't know when you're going to want me to be part of the fall series, if at all.
Probably not this year.
Yeah, so, it was fun.
It was fun, but
Yeah.
no, the budget for next
But I
year is-
understand that the St. Martin's Bulletin listed this.
Yeah. And we've gotten a lot of follow-up saying, I wasn't able to attend, please send me the recording.
Well, that's good. So you get a base.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what did I see this morning? 50. Can't remember what the Eventbrite was, but it was in the mid to high 50s for today.
Yeah.
But
Actually,
that's
no,
good.
low 60s. Because it was 69 last week, and before that, I think it was 100 for the first session.
And somebody said, somehow Matt, I had gotten a thing from this person, and then Matt got one saying, where's the recording? And so we decided we're gonna get Emily to do both recordings and send them out.
Well, that's great. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if we're, I realize we're an on-demand society nowadays, but when it comes to multiple sessions.
but it's also August, and we meant this to be, I don't want to say we meant it to be a lark because I don't want to disrespect it,
No,
but this was really sort of an
it
asterisk.
was way out.
And if you get 59 extra people or some overlap, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, and we are trending as we have been historically, which is the majority of the people who register will view the recording on their own schedule. We only have a fraction of the people who
Yeah.
register actually participate live,
Yeah.
whether in person or virtual, and that's okay. I mean, it's we're just used to it at this point, where we'll have a program, 60 people will be signed up, and 12 people will be on the actual recording.
Yeah.
And that, it's just normal.
In fact, so I've gotten several emails this week saying, where's the recording? And then I got one over the weekend, and I said, I'm not gonna pay attention to you, it's the weekend.
Well, that's the way I feel. I mean, I'm wearing this polo shirt down to Galveston. And
That's dressed up for Galveston.
well, it is. And we're going to some place called Katie's Seafood on
Oh, yeah, so that's the place that used to just be
a joint
a
to buy.
retail.
Yeah.
a retail place.
Well, we're going on Wednesday night.
They bought the old Joe's Crab Shack building,
Huh.
and they turned that in, so let me know how it is, because.
Well, we're not going out. I mean, we'll go to Miller's Landing for breakfast,
Uh-huh.
and we're going to stop by someplace on 14th Street that sells a special type of rhubarb lemon jelly. And so we'll stop it. Well, we liked it last year, but
Sounds good.
So you are or are not going to Kitty Seafood?
we are on Wednesday night we have a Skype with some guy in Canada at 9 o'clock on Thursday. And I had toyed with just leaving at 7 on Thursday morning. And I thought, this is ridiculous. We can sleep in.
So you going there for lunch or dinner?
We're going there for dinner at 7:30.
Okay,
And so we'll get home about 10,
yeah.
But it's the look up the menu. I mean, they have really pricey, fresh off the, but they also have some salads that sounded phenomenal.
Oh, I have. Bob had been wanting, because they hadn't opened yet by the time we left the island. And we've talked about going down there, but we just haven't gotten around to it. And we actually, the one of my favorite restaurants, and I can't remember the name of it, it's west of where we lived. And we were at 71st and Seawall, 81st and Seawall. But it was further down. It wasn't on Seawall. It was on that street that
Broadway.
No, the Stewart Highway, whatever it's called.
The one that goes down the spine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Broadway.
And that was actually one of the best meals I ever had on the island.
Oh, wow.
I like, I mean, Guido's is okay, but I think it's overpriced. for
You
what
know,
you get.
and Guido's was on Texas bucket list this week.
Oh, really?
And I remember the first time I went down there, it was fabulous. And Paulie Guido was in your program.
Right.
And I remember for a birthday, he took the entire class for just an absurd off the meal oyster fest. And then I went with my brother came down, the one who has pancreatic, and we went, and I said, I really feel like I have an AAR pus. It's stodgy. And I remembered things being really, we took a friend out last night for his birthday at Brennan's last night. And it was over the top in terms of service, but it was sort of nice to have 16 people worrying about whether or not your turtle soup tasted, something I will never make myself.
We went to, not this past weekend, but the weekend before for Bob's 80th birthday. Megan came down, we went to Caracol, which is one of our favorites.
Yeah, that is, Rick, her son, has many vices, but one of his good vices is he scoops these things out. And when he comes, hopefully not till Thanksgiving, he will take us to that Asian strip where this new Chronicle guy, they did something. Some Asian writer from the New York Times who came down here. And his first article was essentially, here are 31 meals I've enjoyed so far. And they were like places like Lucille's, the Breakfast Club, and then all these Asian places.
But
Which
Caracol's not Asian.
no, none of. But this guy is obviously a foodie, and so I sent it to Rick, and I said, because we've been out there once with him, and they all look alike to me, and
You can send that to me if you still have.
I don't. I suspect I don't.
Oh.
But his name is, I don't even remember that. But you just Google up the Houston Chronicle, and there's an article about a new Asian. There's Allison Cook and there's Greg Marino.
Well, Allison Cook and Greg Marino have been there forever.
Well, this must be the next generation coming in. And he's interested in things like, Polish Thai fusion. Well, but
That would make for one heck of a pierogi.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oy
the
vey,
pierogies
soy,
by
soy.
themselves are pretty boring, but if you put some of the Asian flavors in there, it might taste good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We went to, for the first time since the pandemic began, we ate in person at Maggiano's last night. And we've been, door dashing them for 2 years. It's one of the few places that really caters well to my daughter's food allergies. And so we were regulars over there.
And where is it?
Maggiano's is up in the Galleria. And
Well, there are several around.
Yeah.
the
There's
one,
one at Memorial City.
I should say the one that we go to is the one at the Galleria. And
That's the original one, and actually my daughter likes that.
You know,
one.
I taught the woman whose family started all those in Chicago. And I had a sabbatical in Chicago, and she gave me a free pass. So there were like 10 of them. Let Us Entertain You was the company in Chicago. I don't know what they call it here, but you okay?
Yeah, choking on some.
Okay.
And it was funny because we were just sitting, getting ourselves settled in, and the waiter came over to take our drink orders and whatnot, and all of a sudden one of the chefs was walking by, and you've been a regular when all of a sudden he looks up and he's just like,
Really?
"You guys are back," and we're like, "Yeah," because we had just taken in. There was a lawyers, all lawyers and judges production of 12 Angry Jurors, and we went and saw that. They had Q&A after. And we were
Oh,
hungry,
wow.
and
That sounds like a nice day.
it was fun. And then so we just said on our way home, because we were coming back from the Heights to Ireland, we just said, let's go, and we're all feeling pretty comfortable in
Yeah,
Snowflake
yeah,
area.
yeah.
And he was just so happy, and he remembered Ellie's standing order, and you could tell he took extra care on this one, and because she was just like, "This is really good." And this morning, the take-home portion, which was supposed to be for today, I noticed this morning as I was just taking out the trash, I was like, "Oh, she already ate her second meal." Okay, well, she's a teenager, so
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they were just so.
Were they having restaurant week?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But they, I mean, and obviously there are fancier places, no question. But
Yeah,
for
but
us, it's
I
just-
don't like fancy places. I mean,
these
if
guys, they're always accommodating.
if Barbara weren't such a snob, we'd eat at Whataburgers on a regular basis.
Well,
I don't do
their
fast food.
breakfast
Well-
taquitos are terrific, so I'm thrilled with that.
And Popeye's spicy chicken. Oh,
never eaten at a Popeyes.
I hadn't either, but Rick, are we about new?
What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, we're about 3 minutes still.
Okay.
I'm gonna let people in at 10 o'clock. And
Okay.
and then do
So-
a quick intro and then let you jump on into things. But yeah, we're just there are certain things like kolaches are an example. Like some people swear by Shipley's kolaches, and I look at them and I go, "Hey, it's a hot dog in a bun. I mean, it's fine for what it is."
And it's pork.
Yeah, and it's and then there's Kolache Factory, and I have no problem with Kolache Factory, but I lived in Waco, which meant that it was only about 20-30 minutes tops to get to West. And you want to talk about kolaches? West is all about kolaches. Oh God, yeah.
Have you been to
It's
Pete's
amazing.
Meats on Richmond, 5,000? I looked them up last night because I wanted to see if you could buy turtle, because it's illegal in some places.
I didn't know that.
Well, it's endangered.
Oh,
And so,
I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've actively sought out turtle.
I had turtle soup when I lived in Philadelphia, but not since then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure.
I'm not really a turtle.
On my list of different foods I've eaten that I would not consider eating today, I'm not sure if that's on there. There's been other stuff. I still remember Bedouin tent in Israel where folks were afraid of eating chicken hearts on shish kebab, and I was just like, bring on the hearts. I didn't care. I was just
Is turtle kosher?
turtle.
It's a shelf?
It doesn't have cleft hooves, so it's I would say no. But let me go ahead, start letting some folks in, and then do you want to say anything? Or okay, then I will say a couple of quick hellos, and then we will just head on into program. Well, good morning for those of you who are just coming in from our waiting room. We welcome you to the Hope and Healing Center and Institute's final session on conscious, spiritual, and soulful aging, led by Andy Achenbaum. We're going to continue to let more people in as they come in. Some of you came in were here a few minutes early, I should say, and we always appreciate that. And others will be joining us, I'm sure, as the presentation begins in earnest. We are, for those of you who are familiar with us, we are HHCI Cares, as you can see on our cover screen for Andy's presentation. The CARES portion of HHCI Cares is the acronym for Caregiving, Aging, Resilience, Ethics, and Spirituality, formerly the Community Bioethics and Aging Center, directed by Dr. Peggy Dettermeyer, who is around the table this morning, just off the edge of the camera view that we have and that you might have minimized. And for those who don't know me, I am Seth Stander, the Community Aging Specialist for HHCI Cares. We are going to go ahead and turn things over to Andy, and I will be going ahead and controlling the slide deck and hopefully in sync with his presentation. And encourage you to go ahead and to utilize the chat if you have questions. We'll have some time afterwards for Q&A if you'd like to go ahead and at that time unmute and ask questions. We certainly welcome that as well. The frequently asked question we get the most is, will we get copies of the recording? Yes, you will absolutely get copies of the recording. We tend to wait until series are completed before going ahead and sending out recordings. So for those of you who have already asked, it is going to be coming your way. Both last week and this week's recording, I should say, will be coming your way in the coming days, once we have a chance to go ahead and streamline out everything that was recorded before the presentation began, so that you have a seamless production to go ahead and take advantage of. Without further ado, we're going to bring on Andy.
Thank you. And let me begin unseemly by thanking both Peggy and Seth for the opportunity to join you in the dog days of August. We managed to miss the hurricanes, and hopefully their transmission will come to you before then. And because I mock them all the time, I'd also like to thank our AV person, Robert, who will leave as soon as he possibly can, but we thank him for all the cooperation.
Well, Robert's heavy lifting days for this series are done, and we appreciate his efforts in getting us set up and running in a way that would take each of us 3-4 times the amount of energy to fulfill. So much appreciated.
So we missed the first session thanks to technology, and because Peggy and Seth wouldn't allow me to use a quill pen or a yellow chalkboard. But at the end of the second session, Seth and Peggy asked a lot of questions about conscious and spiritual aging. And for those of you who missed that or don't quite have the streamlining, I'd like to talk about all three of those before I begin. Most of the people in this room, except for Robert, are boomers who really count on social.
I'm sorry.
Seth just looks like he should be a boomer.
I've got this something, there's an X stuck in my throat somewhere. So that must be it. I just wanted to make sure Generation X.
Yeah, he's not Generation Z, believe me. Anyway, it's clear that the discussion continues. And while I'm responsible for what's going on and invite you to join in, I want to suggest that conscious, spiritual, and soulful aging are interrelated. And it doesn't just apply to boomers, and it doesn't just apply to Generation Z and everyone else in between, because many people are quite likely to just say, my work is my life, my wife is my life, my kids are my life. But conscious aging requires a step of being willing to look inward. I want to see if I have an inner voice, and if I do have an inner voice, what it looks like. Spiritual aging, in contrast, says, not only am I looking within, but I see a divine voice within. That is, I accept the fact that however you define it, there's an ultimate reality. There's a God, there's a Krishna, there's something that ties you in with a larger world. And soulful aging, which will be part of today's discussion, says that if you really are connected under that sacred canopy, there are certain things that you can do. This is not head talk. This is, in fact, a way to reframe, reinstore some of the things you're doing. I have spent 50 years of my life studying old age, and I wrote a fairly decent dissertation in the 1970s before Jimmy Carter was president. I must say, I wish I could destroy most of what I had written for the last 45 years, because I have found, as I move to this new slide, that old age is different from what I expected. It's remote. And my first conscious sightings of it really began after I remarried, after I was semi-retired / fired from a teaching post, found myself drifting along, but I saw a certain paradox and mystery to it all. The paradox is that we're pilgrims. That's a sort of Protestant word. We're wayfarers. We're sojourners. And we have the right, because we're conscious, to be able to explore foreign shores. I have been nearsighted since the age of 6. 2 cataract surgeries later still keeps me wearing glasses. And as my wife would be quick to tell you, I'm blind to the obvious. And so the only conclusion I can make is that the only certainty about aging is uncertainty, except for the familiar fact that I'm going to die someday too. The mystery is that we're entering into a terra incognita. I took Latin, so I want to show it off. We're landing into an unknown land, an environment which, because this is a session on soulful and spiritual aging, is grace-filled. There's a grace to it all. I'm not going to sing Abide With Me, but it's clear that there's some ultimate reality which helps shape it. And to be perfectly frank, it scares the hell out of me. I view it with both awe and awe. And so we start today's session embracing yet again the paradox of a mystery. I, you, Seth, Peggy, and even Robert, before he leaves the room, must nourish a self-conscious awareness of what we have by way of strengths and joys. We have to fess up to our weaknesses and fears, And they, over the life course, in some ways, I'm still 3, deal with lifelong limitations and strengths. And so, as we said last time, we review and remember our journeys. And for the sake of time to talk about soulful aging, I'm just going to raise the questions we raised last time, and we can discuss it during Q&A if you wish. When we listen to our inner voices, what times in our past still give us joy? Why do I still wince when I think of some really gross things? Well, maybe not gross, just disrespectful and bad things I did that make us sad. What moments continue to surprise me? Did I forget them? Did I suppress them? Did I move on? And then finally, how do I deal with loose ends? It's not a neat picture. Robert's leaving, so he's going to figure out his loose ends. And so that brings us, it seems to me, to good enough aging. Good enough is a phrase from Winnicott, a child psychologist who didn't make Benjamin Spock's bestseller list, but he suggested that parents like Spock should realize that when they're raising kids, they can do it good enough. And in our case, where most of us are not still raising kids, although I always worry that my 40-something daughter will return home, but she's not showing any tendency to do that. It opens us to engage in both what Seth called life review and life repair. This is a hope and healing center that cares. And so this notion of healing and repairing is a big part of conscious, spiritual, and soulful aging. There is no single recipe. I can't give you a Google site to look at because each of us proceed in our own personal, individuated, and to varying degrees conscious way in all sorts of ways that are similar to mine, complementary to mine, and radically dissimilar from mine. I've had the privilege of knowing Peggy Dittermeyer for several decades. I've gotten to know Seth during the last year, and they're remarkable people who I like being around. But I would never venture forth to suggest that the 3 paths we've took, much less Robert now in absentia takes, are any way similar. We have to follow that. I know a lot of friends my age, especially alpha dog males who went to fancy schools, who are facing retirement as a crisis. They really want to use these extra innings that the longevity revolution gives us. Did I really make it to 75? Holy cow, my father died at 55. I have 20 years on him. Today would have been his 92nd birthday. I don't expect to make it to 92nd. But what I do know is that I have no desire particularly to refire. I don't want to be put up on a shelf, but I don't particularly want to relive talents I had when I was a lecturer, nor do I want to hide imperfections in a sort of Texas Marlboro Man half-truth. And so I spend a lot of my retirement not doing this. This is a real privilege for an old lecturer to be able to come back, but I do it by volunteering. I have time to volunteer. And in a town like Houston, where the private sector really complements a lot of public initiatives, and this Sealing Center in the largest Episcopal church in the United States is part of that. There are people who help Peggy and Seth and their staff reach out to people as volunteers, dealing particularly with mental health issues. I like to visit grandkids. Mine live in North Carolina, but COVID for the last 2 years has ruined that. So I've been on Zoom with them. And what I really like is letting go. After I give this talk, I'm taking off the sports coat, I'll spare you my taking off the pants. And my wife and I are going to Galveston, where we have absolutely no agenda except going to a fancy fish restaurant on Wednesday night. And so for me, conscious aging is more than head talk. It's really an invitation to dig deeper and deeper. And now that I have about 30 pounds I don't need, I have a chance to dig very deep and very deep through the fat, through the muscle, if there is any, in order to discern and embrace my inner self. I'm an optimist by nature, but I realize that most of us are going to endure losses and we're going to anticipate joys. I'm no longer a professor. I was never a doctor because I never went to medical school. I had a PhD, but I never mentioned it. And so my identity at work is gone. Oh, yeah, I think he taught here some time ago. Maybe when Caesar was crossing the Rubicon, I can't remember. And at home, I've taken up cooking. My wife hates cooking, but she doesn't hate coming in and telling me that when you steam rice, you don't put it on high because then you get brown rice. I have discovered that my bodily functions are unraveling. I could spend the rest of the session giving you an organ recital that I have and my wife has. But what I've also noticed is because you're retired, because you have an AARP card, you somehow lose the respect of young people who used to come into your office to suck up to get an A. And worse for me, an OCD alpha dog, I've lost control. The patriarchy that I assumed I would have at 80, 75 is not mine. I have to give it up and face it. And along with that, I realize there's a fragility of life. I have long-standing friendships, and I find out that somebody died 6 months ago because their obituary appears. And I'm living into dying. There is just no way I can avoid it. I hope that by the time the time comes, it's relatively painless and fairly quick, but I have no idea. The only certainty is uncertainty. And so I seize the day. Well, that shows too much energy. I take delight in the day. My wife and I's bed, I don't want to get too personal, looks at sunrises, and I delight every morning to see what it looks like to see the pink clouds. I love splurges. We went to restaurant week last night. Actually, we went to Brennan's, and the service was over the top, and the turtle soup I will never try to cook. And we enjoy a gentle touch. I'm not going to go into a semi-porn novel, but the connection, the human touch, the kiss, the brush, the familiarity of it all, I take delight in. And I meditate. My wife likes to not get out of bed before 7. I like to have a cup of coffee at 5:30 in the morning. And so I go into the guest room and I read the Psalms, or I read some books that I'll give you at the end of the session. And I give thanks. I give thanks. I'm grateful for the past, despite its warts. I'm grateful for the present, despite the fact that the Republic of Texas, I won't go further, you know what I'm saying. And I know that the future, while uncertain, is going to unfold in a story that I will be partially the architect of creating. And so we get now really to the core of last week and this week. Spiritual aging, authentically, and that's the word. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm full of imperfections, but I can be authentic. For better and worse, what you see is what you get. And what you see is what you get is in part of the grace-filled connection that I perceive with an ultimate reality. I'll spare you my ethnic backgrounds, but I'll tell you I had a Jewish grandfather, a Catholic grandfather, and I was born in 1947. So, of course, I was an Episcopalian. But we're not talking religion, we're talking spirituality. And I think that spiritual reality lies in realizing, feeling. I'm a professor, I use my head, but feeling and accepting that our souls are filled with grace and grit. As we contact a friend, and I use the word friend with a capital F because it's part of the ultimate reality, who loved us before we were born and who I presume will love us after we're gone from this earth, in celebrating good times, but also healing us, comforting us in the dark woods that Dante talked about, that Robert, no longer in a room in midlife, is probably experiencing. I think that I'm both religious and spiritual, which puts me in a minority position for the boomer generation. But it seems to me that my religious beliefs and traditions can synthesize, energize, and also dislocate spiritual aging. It's a reciprocal relationship. And it occurs because we're dealing with mysticism with soulful aging. We're dealing with mystery. We're dealing with awakening to a world that I frankly knew intellectually, but never experienced when I was groping for tenure, trying to help get my kids through teenage years. And it helps me these days when I find my nation radically polarized and I feel disillusioned. The illusion of this being one happy family is hard to embrace all the time. And I feel alienated. I feel alone. Thank God my wife shares my political views. And so it seems to me that the charge is that we are pilgrims or wayfarers. And to take a line from the New Testament, we have to be wise. Wisdom's a part of soulful aging and spiritual aging. But we have to be humble. And we have to be humble like snakes, which is a tough thing for me to say, because when I was a Boy Scout climbing rocks, I actually petted a copperhead, which could have killed me right then and there. And yet at the same time, we're filled with an innocence, a childlike, if not childish innocence, as we delve layer and layer through fat, grit, and muscle more deeply into the divine kingdom on earth. And so, as I said last time, and I'm going to modify in light of what we talked about today, it seems to me there are three things. One is immanence, which empowers us to fuse mind, heart, and soul within ourselves. I must admit that I was a latecomer to innocence and immanence because I was too self-absorbed in my career. And then I think I always knew I was really just a pebble. I thought very highly of myself, but at the end of the day, I was merely a pebble, a small pebble at that, in this large cosmic force that put me at sea and at bay in calm and turbulent seas. And I think as a historian, I was always more obsessed with upholding institutions in the past. I wasn't smart enough to be an economist, so I never made a lot of money projecting what the stock market would look like in 2060. But I have lived, at least in my boomer years, in the present, aware of the history, aware of the current, and aware of the hopes that are tied in with a dimension of time which is always animating us, always helping us to realize that in our limitations and ignorance ignorance, our inability to see. We give birth to love as we love, and I capitalize it because of the connection with the ultimate reality, which gives birth to prayers, thanks, oops, wows, as Seth said last week, of hope-filled relations with an ultimate reality. And so now, while time permits, let's me get to soulful aging and do it fairly slowly. Soulful aging, it seems to me, differs somewhat from conscious aging and spiritual aging, although they're interacting and they're dynamic. And I'm certainly aware of my own conscious and spiritual awakenings. But it seems to me soulful aging involves a really deep, imminent knowing. I really try to have a relationship with this ultimate reality. And I'm not alone. I'm one of billions on Earth today, and I'm with trillions and infinite numbers of pieces of sand in the past, and generations beyond my grandchildren, not yet born, who are bonded in this communion, who are expected, or we hoped we expect, to seize each and every day as a new adventure. But to do that requires us to be, it seems to me, wholly mindful, consciously awake, and spiritually receptive to what's unfolding right now, tomorrow, today, in our brief journeys. The average life expectancy of a man my age is that I'll probably die somewhere in my 80s. 80 years against a world that's been existing for billions of years and which could die after my children die because of global warming. But in the process of that larger umbrella, it brought me to ripening, a wonderful word from King Lear, unto death. And like Lear, we are fools who speak the ultimate truths of being human as others view us as ignorant, insane, dependent. And at the same time, we empty ourselves. Oh, I'm self-centered. Last night at dinner, we were celebrating the birthday of a friend, and they brought him a second dessert, and they brought each of us extra spoons. He didn't share the bananas Foster. I didn't need it because I was eating my wife's beignets, and I had gotten a big piece of cake. So the last thing in the world I needed were empty carbohydrates with sweets when I said I was giving up desserts. But I'm self-centered, you know? I mean, I've been around, I'm self-centered, but somehow in fits and starts, we transform ourselves, and now I'm being a bit Jungian because I think that's part of the picture too, into attentive listeners. I made a career, a halfway decent career, pontificating, lecturing. But when students came into office hours, when male colleagues came in and said, "Tell me about your prostate cancer," when friends tell me, "I love Houston, but I'm going to move up north to be closer to my friends," I have to listen. They aren't my life, but I have to listen. And I have to listen with compassion, with empathy. And so it seems to me we seek rays of light at midnight as we dare to accept the vocation, and I use that word deliberately because it has spiritual overtones, of a mysterious, albeit partially conscious, embodiment of Soulful Aging, invited by truth. Let's cut the lecture, huh? Soulful aging involves loving and suffering simultaneously. I have learned to love with a capital L, and I suffer as I listen to others in their dark woods. And so this is hardly Christopher Columbus. It's not Vasco da Gama. It's not even the guy Galvez who founded Galveston. I stumble. I trip. I lose my balance. And I honor silence. They used to call me Motor Mouth when I was in 4th grade. How ironic that I now find myself, obviously not now, quiet. There are times when my wife and I are engaged in a hearty discussion, and I think she's just wrong, and she thinks I'm nuts, that I realize the only solution is to keep my damn mouth shut and hope we change the subject to where we're going to eat in Galveston. I have compassion, a word which from its etiology means to suffer with other people. Part of the immanence tied to transcendence is that we are our brother's keepers in some ways because we share both the mystery and the paradoxes of growing old together. And we honor. I never took baptismal vows very seriously, but my faith tradition makes a big deal out of baptism. And the last commandment that we're asked to make is to honor and respect the dignity of other people. I must say, one of the great joys I've had in living in Houston is I've met and befriended all sorts of people who aren't the like deal in me. They're people of color. There are people who are worrying about where their kids' next meal's going to come from. They're in single partnered relationships. They're suicidal. And I have to find them where they are with patience. Another word which from the Greek and Latin means I suffer with them. I don't have a white horse anymore. I shot them a few weeks ago. But I have to sit there and say, I'm not Peg Bracken. I'm not Mr. Fix-It. Sometimes the best thing I can do is to simply be present. And so I come back to where I ended the last slide. Soulful aging ultimately balances suffering and loving in a sacred canopy in which I am aware that my authenticity is grace-filled and fraught with uncertainty. And so before we open this up for discussion, and I'm counting on Peggy, who was taking notes, and Seth, who was smirking during this entire talk, will have some further reflections to make after they did last time. But in the interim, I thought we should end this in a scholarly way, and I should give you a few helpful references. The first are the Psalms. I'm always impressed by the fact that at least Judaism and various branches of Christianity always include the Psalms. And, you know, I know the 23rd Psalm because I go to a lot of funerals. I know Psalm 100 because they say it at Thanksgiving. But the Psalms are just amazing if we attribute them to David or some other author. The panoply of the visions of the ultimate reality we get in the Psalms and the responses that people, I mean, I'm not a farmer. I don't live in an agrarian society, and I don't view myself as a peasant, but I can identify with people raging. Why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me in old age? What the hell's going on here? Oh, like a deer, I'm near a brook and I long for you. I read the Psalms, as I told you, every morning. And I'm not an Augustinian and I'm not a Jesuit. I don't read them systematically, one after another. I just sort of flip open this book. I have this book that this woman did that she edited. I can't remember her name and I should have written it down. But it's sort of a feminist interpretation of the love with a capital L and the S of suffering that is found in the Psalms. And I'm always struck by a dependent clause. I'm always struck by an opening verse. And while I'm reading and done with the Psalms, I pick up this book by some man whose names I can't pronounce, Eswan, but the title's correct. It's one of these day-by-day medications, Freudian slip, meditations, not medication. I get medication from reading Henry Nouwen and Richard Rohr every day too. And I like listening to Joan Chichester once a week. This is a book that's very eclectic because the man is a Hindu who lived in the United States. And it's just a panoply. Master Eckhart one day, Rumi the next, and so it goes. And talking of Rumi, I discovered Rumi when I was teaching at the University of Houston. And you know that Coleman Barks' Essential Rumi is the best-selling book of poetry in the United States. And Rumi's amazing because Rumi is earthy, and I mean earthy, to the point sometimes of soft porn. And he was in love, not only with his family, but with a mentor with whom he poured out the anguish, the enthusiasm he felt. I never met Thomas More, and I don't think he was the guy that was beheaded by one of the Henrys. But his book, Soulmates, along with Kenneth Leach's Soulmates, Soul Friends, I read periodically. And I met a friend through a friend named Carol Osborne, who used to be a corporate exec who wrote lots of books on how to get ahead in the corporate world. And then when she hit a certain age, she started writing books from a feminist perspective about soulfulness. I first read her when I read a book by Bob Weber and Carol Osborne called Spiritual Age. But her most recent book, The Making of an Old Soul, I'm not a woman. I like women, but I'm not a woman. And so to listen to her voice and to listen to her enthusiasm is incredible. And then to show that self-centeredness is still part of my MO, I give you an article I wrote last year. It's actually a version of an article I wrote for someone else who rejected it within 24 hours. And once I was freed from the rejection, I wrote what I really wanted to write. It's a German press. I don't think very many people have ever seen the article. I shared it with Peggy and Seth, which is part of the reason why I think I'm here. And so I give you the fancy APA listing. Take it or leave it. Amen. So what's the time? 10:38. This could be the shortest revision we ever saw. I open it up to Seth to be the moderator.
Well, I'm gonna throw it over to Peggy because it sounded like she wanted to ask a question.
Yeah,
So
I'm just curious about Osborne. I'm not familiar.
About
with
Carol
Carol
Osborne?
The Making of an Old Soul. How do you think her feminist perspectives differ from yours?
I spent much of my life as a dualist. You're white, you're black, you're male, you're female, you're straight, you're gay. And I always knew there were some little things in between, you know. I'm a child of an interracial marriage. I'm a hermaphrodite. I'm bisexual. But I think in my conscious, spiritual, and soulful aging, I realized that there was much more fluidity along a continuum, which had all sorts of subcategories that I wasn't aware of. Here's a woman married to a psychiatrist whose one son is a physicist. And so she has certain, to be essentialist, male qualities. She obviously was a professional success. And she obviously lives in a town near Jane Thiebaud, another spiritual director in Louisville, Kentucky, and Anne Lamont, who lives nearby. And so she plays in the big leagues. And I don't know how much of a big bestseller she is, but she's certainly a better seller than I am. And yet, there is something about her spirit which resonates with me. She pierces my soul in a way that I can't really define, because they're men our age. I mean, you and Peggy pierce my soul, but there's something about the way she writes that I know I couldn't write. And so I'm really, and I use the word feminist because that's what she calls herself. And I realize I've given you a terrible, evasive answer.
How does
But
she define an old soul?
she really defines it pretty much the way I define soulful aging.
Okay.
And if I were a plagiarist, I'd admit that she was a big source as I was preparing this third set of lectures, because she does listen. I mean, obviously, somebody who writes 30 books takes a computer while they're driving. It's just, she's not on a cell phone. She's writing another chapter. And yet, on the other hand, I've talked to her, and she not just thinks, but feels before she talks. And she's open. My friend Bob Weber, who I talk to every Friday, who was a Jesuit in the making before he discovered he couldn't live with the celibacy, met her at an American Society on Aging conference. She was going down the escalator, sort of like Trump before he announced in 2016, and he was going up, but they could see each other's name tags, and they said, "You, I want to talk to you afterwards." And so somehow they got on the same floor. They don't drink very much, so I suspect they didn't meet at a bar. But the conversation after that escalator exchange lasted 5 hours and culminates within this network. Rick Moody, a fellow I'm very close to, writes forwards for her books all the time. And so the little network that I hang around with, mostly in the United States, is in part filled like people like Carol Osborne. And there are other women. I met Jane Thiebaud at a Canuga conference, and I found myself who liked women and didn't objectify them, nurtured, comforted, touched, certainly not in an erotic way. Well, sometimes, but mostly touched by their wisdom, by their ability to say, "Here I am, I welcome you." And I toyed with putting welcome in this talk because I think welcome is part of what we're talking about. The connection, the openness is, I welcome you.
Peggy is actively considering Candy's
Yeah,
response.
I'm thinking about the concept of welcome. Because that goes through. We've been talking about spirituality, but that goes into some religious traditions too.
Well, the Episcopal
welcoming
Church
strangers.
welcomes you was a big sign in the 50s.
Well, it
And
still
I
is
thought,
around.
and I'm sure it is right here on this campus.
I mean, if you drive through any small town, you can see those signs all over the place.
And I think that gets to the heart of what we've been trying to do here. I saw the word welcome, and I expected to see the sign from the Rotary and the Kiwanis welcome me to town too. But I think you're right. If you put this into a spiritual and soulful context, the word welcome, like the word good morning or good evening, which clearly have religious antecedents, which we've desacralized. And yet, in a sunny way, I think a soulful aging person recognizes the fact that you're not going to say God bless you unless someone sneezes. And yet, in a certain way, we're in the world, but not of the world. And what soulful aging permits me to do is to sort of step out of the circle that I'm in and look at it somewhat objectively and imagine, and that's the word I use, imagine where I fit, where I don't fit, how I change, how I conform. And that ability to be able to switch perspectives, knowing that at the end of the day, Mr. Rogers was right. Yeah. Welcome you.
Well, I can remember years ago when a colleague and I were co-teaching a confirmation class. We always did a unit on who is my neighbor. And from a group of sixth graders, that even has a different perspective than it does to me now.
Yeah, and I know we're not supposed to talk politics, so when you streamline this, you can cut it out. I mean, I think that's in some ways why the Supreme Court's actions on the environment, on women's rights, I mean, the loss of autonomy that's involved in some of the Supreme Court decisions, it runs much deeper than me not being able to pick the restaurant or me able to control what I'm going to do when I leave this place. I mean, we're really getting down to personhood. And given people's, I suspect, mixed feelings about certain state laws, it's really hard for me not to look at the fact that my wife at 75 is probably not going to get pregnant. But if she did get pregnant, if I had done one of these trophy bride things and married at 20 something, all the money in the world is not going to help us escape certain laws. And so am I next? Is my neighbor next?
Wasn't it Bonhoeffer said that if they come for me and or they're coming for my neighbor and I don't do anything, they'll come for me.
Well, you know, and that's true. And you sit there and you think of some of the polarization and the we, thus, us distinction may last 5 years. It may last through the next couple of elections. But the point of the fact is we live in a diverse society.
Well, and we have a group of Congress people who are actively taking on old age by threatening to cancel Social Security.
Yeah. And, you know.
It doesn't get any more real than that.
Yeah.
For the people who have paid into the system for their whole lives with the promise that they would get at least a basis to live on once they were retired, a number that keeps moving.
And, you know, I know Seth's going to have to cut this, so I don't mind saying, we don't know what's going to happen in the midterms. We don't know what's going to happen in 2024. But it is not improbable to me that it's possible that Senator Scott from Florida, who wants to abolish Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, might not have enough votes in Kevin McCarthy's and Mitch McConnell's Senate. Isn't that cheery for soulful aging?
Well, I wouldn't presume to go ahead and cut anything that either of you have said. However, I will go ahead and offer the standard disclaimer as being a 501c3 organization that we will certainly encourage anyone who is listening live or listening to a recording of this to go ahead and to exercise your rights, and that includes your right to vote. However you choose to vote is your business. But ultimately, we want you to go ahead and to consider the type of society you wish to live in that allows for conscious, spiritual, and soulful aging to thrive. When we talk about hierarchies of needs, how can we go ahead and live in a way that Andy, I won't presume to do justice to you know and try to encapsulate everything that he has said over these last few weeks, but I do think that in order to actively engage in these practices that allow us to open ourselves to deep-seated feelings, to allow ourselves to live fully in the present, and to allow ourselves to look at one another with empathy and compassion, we have to get beyond meeting our primal needs. And as a society, how we help those who are struggling to meet their primal needs very often defines our character. So depending on how you wish to see that society move forward is going to be how you will advocate and how you will vote when the time comes for you to do so in any election cycle. So I think there's absolutely everything that's been said is appropriate in terms of encouraging people to do what they think is best for themselves, for their families, and to encourage the type of society in which these contemplative practices, which allow us to have a more holistic understanding of what makes us tick, are possible.
Let me turn corners and pretend this is a seminar. You mentioned hierarchy of needs. What do you mean?
When I speak about hierarchy of needs, I look primarily at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the understanding that what we need for physical survival comes before we have the luxury of contemplating the higher portions of our nature. And we do speak throughout much of the educational offerings that either HHCI offers, various faith communities offer. We do speak from a place very often of privilege. And I think it's important for us to understand and appreciate when we have had our essential needs on that pyramid, the bottom of that pyramid represents the things we need in order to survive: food, clothing, shelter, being able to earn enough or to save enough so that our needs eventually can transform into not just being met at a base level, but being transformed into our wants. And with our wants comes our yearning for meaning. If we are constantly in survival mode, or if we are constantly fight, flight, or freeze mode, we are not contemplating in a way that the higher angels of our nature would intend for us to do, because we are, at least as I understand it, a combination of both the mundane and the spiritual. When you look at, for example, the Decalogue, however you choose to read the various translations of the Ten Commandments, when we get to the portion where we speak about honoring our fathers and our mothers, we talk about a bridge being created in that commandment between commandments that are between God and people, and eventually the remainder of the Decalogue that speaks about relationships between human beings alone. And that bridge is in the form of, it takes not just two people able to go ahead and to create a human being, it takes a soul to form a human being, and that soul comes from the source of creation. So again, it bridges us. And when you are in a place of deprivation, very often you are looking, to use the example of Psalms, and Psalms of lament, protest, rather than Psalms that try to attune us to our higher nature. So it is a matter of priority. And it goes back, which is why I think your conversations are both completely appropriate for this piece. And my disclaimer is appropriate as well, except I will repeat what I said before, which is that everything that's been discussed today only works if we contribute to the creation and maintenance of a society in which everyone, in whatever way possible, has the luxury of contemplating these higher values that we have been wrestling with these last few weeks. And the creation and maintenance of that society is in our hands, despite understandable skepticism and cynicism that we've experienced in these polarizing years. And it does come down to speaking out, exercising our rights, and amongst those rights, the right to vote is preeminent. Now, if anybody out there who's listening wants to run for public office, we encourage that as well. And know that you will likely have people thanking you and supporting you for offering to, at whatever level, serve your community. Volunteerism goes in another direction. Advocacy goes in another direction. There's more than one pathway to improving the society around us. But in the end, when we do so, we allow more and more people beyond those who may be reading these slides, listening today, or listening to this recording, to contemplate these what make me tick questions that we have been asking over these last few weeks. And in essence, we ask in almost every program that we offer here at HHCI. After all, remember that we are constantly circling around, if not outright targeting, the concept of improving mental health. And part of that holistic pathway is improving our understanding of our soulful selves.
You know, one of my character flaws is I listened to what you had to say, and it was a wonderful summary and extension of some of the words I contributed. But I seize on certain words. Before this broadcast began, I told Peggy and Seth that I wanted to publish a bunch of essays on soulful aging. And the journal I had picked, a friend of mine told me was predatory. And I thought about the word predatory, and I thought, I don't want to be part of a predatory thing. And I turned to my wife, who really is a wonderful soulmate, and she said, well, sometimes predatory could be good. And I said, yeah, and sometimes, going on the stage of Chautauqua and trying to kill Salman Rushdie may make sense to some people. But the word that you used that hit me was yearning, which is in some ways, to me, a more spiritual word than even longing. I mean, I use longing because it was in Psalm 42. But when you bring yearning into Maslow and say, well, obviously, I have to pay my taxes. Obviously, if I'm called up to military service, I have to decide what I'm going to do. But the way you used yearning in telling people to run for public office, to volunteer in uncertain ways, is a way of feeding the soul. When I yearn for something, I don't want Don Johnson on the evening news telling me that my plumbing will be better because they've been doing it for 45 years. I mean, I hear that commercial every night and I wish him well. And I have great respect for Mattress Mac because of all the things he does. But I have a sneaking suspicion I'm not yearning to get a free mattress if the Astros win the World Series. And I have a damn clear chance that that's not the way you were using the word yearning.
I think, in many ways, one of the more powerful presentations I gave when I served in pulpit life, I was part of a panel in which we had an imam, a Presbyterian minister speaking to seniors who were leading a panel at their high school, through their high school's National Honor Society on essentially how to live a good life. And they asked us after a good, back and forth discussion to summarize what was indispensable as far as we were concerned in the making of a good life. And I had the fortune of going last, so I valued the offers of my colleagues. The minister who spoke about the need to have a faith in a higher power, and by extension, the need to belong to a community of faith in expressing devotion to that higher power. I am all in favor of us being stronger together in community, as well as cherishing the individual spiritual experience. The Imam spoke very well about the need for spiritual literacy, the understanding of the seminal texts that help a religious institution move forward, because its adherents understand the texts that help to form that religious denomination. And I applauded them in my remarks for coming up with some wonderful things. And then I went ahead and looked at the seniors and the parents and the underclassmen who were all gathered. And I said, but what I'm going to go ahead and tell you is indispensable is to understand the power of compound interest. And I said, understandably, you may have some questions about why I would say that. And my answer was, I want to speak to pragmatism. It costs money moving forward for you to further your education. It costs money moving forward as you enter adulthood to go ahead and to meet your needs and get to a point where you can approach your wants. And it costs money moving forward after you've gone ahead and safely put that mask over your face to go ahead and then turn to put the mask on the face of the child or the neighbor next to you to make sure that they've got enough breathing to keep them alive. And by breath, in this case, as a society, talking about them reaching the point where they can too reach beyond their needs, beyond their physical wants, and begin to yearn, and I use the terminology there as well, for something higher in terms of understanding what faith is, being a part of a community of faith, what literacy is, and understanding how it helps to form the soul into an ever-evolving entity. And ultimately, for these folks, I'm hoping 50 years down the line, conscious and spiritual and soulful aging will follow, because they have the ability to focus on these, because they have gone beyond mere sustenance in their day-to-day lives. I don't recall why I chose at that moment to go ahead and choose it, only that it felt right, because I understood that pragmatic needs help a society aspire to greater heights.
For those of you who weren't privy to the discussions that Peggy, Seth, and I have had over the past year, which sort of led serendipitously to them taking the time when you're in Colorado or the shores of Alabama to do this presentation. But I hope you watch the process of what has transpired over the last 10 minutes. I fumbled Peggy's question about Carol Osborne's feminism, because my sense of Carol Osborne as an individual talking to a diverse audience doesn't really fit under what I think feminism is. When I think of feminism, I think of people like Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. And Carol Osborne doesn't fit that mold. And so whatever preconceptions I have don't quite fit. And as I listen to Seth, who is provocative in a healing way, I sit there and I go, indispensable. Now, that's a word we didn't put into this seminar. And we didn't put the word meaning laden, really hammer away at that. But in some ways, when Seth talks about what makes me tick, what makes me literate, when I talk about feeding, and when Peggy reminds us that we have to think about living into death, I realize these are all sort of kaleidoscopic ways to get down to what this Soulful Aging seminar was about. And that is our individual and collective search for meaning that we actualize in humdrum ways, like saying hello to people, like not killing the guy when I'm driving down the Galveston, cuts in front of me at 90 miles an hour and then makes an exit. It's meaning. It's the search for meaning within and without right now.
And we will do much more as we move into our formal programming year, September through June. We go ahead and we further this discussion, whether through other speakers in our third Thursday lunch and learn sessions, whether from our own staff, such as our CEO, Dr. Matt Stanford, whether through our Gateway to Hope personnel and our wonderful community educators, Carolina and Mariana, and others to follow. And whether it's also through our grief support groups, our ability to go ahead and help caregivers through savvy caregiver courses. All of these are here, not just to simply say, look at what we do, but rather to say, we understand that your higher aspirations may be hindered if your day-to-day needs cannot be clearly met. And we want to do whatever we can, wherever possible, to go ahead and to be a bridge towards needs and wants and higher aspiration. So we hope that this has been a stepping stone along the way for those of you who have been listening to this session. Again, for those of you who joined us a little later on, recordings for this session and the previous session will be made available by registering. You will get that in your email once we have a chance to edit our various broadcasts. And again, we won't be editing out what would otherwise be considered provocative content, because that is also the fabric of our society, is to wrestle with the quantitative and qualitative directions our society takes. So I think it's been wonderful conversation all around. We want to thank Andy so much for going ahead and preparing and delivering meaningful presentations, whether captured for posterity or not, throughout this series in August, and for taking the time in August to go ahead and to give us extra thoughtful material to wrestle with as we consider moving into what will hopefully be a much cooler fall for those of you who live here in Houston or in similar climes, and a wonderful and meaningful year of learning for those who will be joining us. Thank you so much.
I don't want to be like Ronald Reagan stealing the microphone from his opponent and saying, I paid for this microphone. But I do want to have the last word, sort of, and that is where I began. And that is to thank you, Peggy, and this place with its various bridges to help us by listening to us and working to hope and healing in a cares, that should be a caring way, but I'll say cares way. Thank you. Thank you for letting us be part of it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a wonderful week, and know that we will be sending these materials out in days after we have a chance to complete our edit. Take care.